Hello, everybody. It's Alex Swallow here, and welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm very excited to introduce you to the amazing Dorie Clark. I've been a fan of her work for many years, and having the opportunity to host her on the podcast was genuinely one of the greatest professional privileges I've ever had. If coaching was a competition, Dorie Clark would be a truly fearsome competitor. A university graduate at the age of 18, she has since embarked on a unique career spanning journalism, politics, writing, coaching, consultancy, education, and community building. And that's without mentioning her musicals, stand-up comedy, TED Talks, and conferences. Thankfully, Dorie is with us on this episode of the Coach's Journey podcast to insist that coaching is not a competition. On the contrary, she says we all need each other and must find a community of practitioners who can support us in our goals as we navigate an ever-changing coaching landscape. Dorie launched her first consulting and coaching practice in 2006 before rising to the very top of her profession. She was named the world's #1 communications coach in the Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Awards and is the best-selling author of books like The Long Game, Entrepreneurial You, and Standout, which was named the #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. In conversation with me, Dorie draws on her vast and varied experience as she shares personal and professional insights about overcoming barriers to success in coaching, debunking commonly held myths and barriers to personal development that keep many of us from fulfilling our potential. She offers an invaluable perspective on what coaches can do to future-proof themselves in the age of AI, and shares learning from her Trajectory Mastermind Thought Leadership Group and her Recognized Expert Reputational Development course. We also talk about the challenge of being a beginner and how to cultivate an authentic, confident stance, where to find the roots of our self-esteem and how to strengthen it, handling knockbacks and rejection in a way that actually drives you and your business forward, how to spot structural risks in your coaching business, and how to protect yourself against the winds of fortune. I hope that this episode gives you so much food for thought and practical lessons for your coaching practice, and also that it piques your interest to learn more about Dorie's incredible work. Dorie Clark, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Alex, I'm so glad to talk with you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm an unashamed fan of your work and have been for many years, so I'm exceptionally excited to speak to you today. And there's so many things I want to get into. I followed your work for a long time, so I've seen the evolution of your work and also the evolution of your practice and the way that you show up in the world. But this is the first time I've been able to speak to you, and so it's very, very exciting for me. But first, I wanted to ask you the question that we ask every guest on the show, which is, how did you first come across coaching?
I first heard about coaching over 25 years ago. I was living in Boston at the time, and I remember reading articles in the Boston Globe, in particular about a woman named Cheryl Richardson, who was kind of an early coach, sort of more in the life coach space. But I think she was local to Boston, so they wrote about her a lot, and so that was my introduction to coaching. And I thought it sounded really interesting, but I didn't really understand a lot about how to start as a coach or what that process looked like. But it definitely piqued an interest.
And I'd love to get more into your career. I think you've had such an interesting career, and there's aspects of your career which I see parallels with mine. So political stuff, non-profit stuff. There's some really interesting things you've done. But I'd just like to let the listener know a little bit about how much is coaching in your work at the moment. I know you do so many different things, which we'll definitely get into, but how much coaching do you think you do at the moment?
I only do a little bit of direct coaching now, although in the past I've certainly done a lot. These days, a lot of my work is around supporting coaches and consultants. And so the form that takes, I run an online course and community called Recognized Expert, which helps professional service providers who are really good at their job get better known for it. And essentially the term of art is platform building. So we support people with that. So I work with about 1,000 people in that context. And then I also run an annual mastermind that is primarily composed of coaches and consultants. And so I really spend a lot of time in that world, but my own coaching these days is somewhat limited because I'm trying to do more work at scale.
Yeah, yeah. And I've really noticed that it's been lovely to see your work develop over the years in that way. And as someone who really admires your work, I'm always happy when more people hear about you and your audience gets bigger and a little more Dorie gets out into the world. I think that's very much a good thing for the world. And I just think you have some really admirable qualities in my view, including very much humility and hard work, both of which I hope to get into at some point during this conversation. So I'd love to know a little bit about, I mentioned, at one point you were involved in politics in some form. I know you've also been a journalist, non-profit. You've done so many different things. Could you tell us a bit about your career in your own words? What have you been up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So the very quick pressy, and you can ask further questions if you'd like, is that after I finished undergraduate, I went straight into graduate school. I got a master's degree in theological studies,
Mhm.
and I imagined that I would have a career in academia. But unfortunately, I got turned down by all the doctoral programs that I applied to. So I had to very quickly come up with a plan B, which was journalism. And I was very pleased with myself. I thought this was a great plan B because I'd still get to write and talk to people and think. But that was right around the time at the turn of the millennium that the newspaper industry was collapsing. And I didn't really understand that at the time. But I did get hired and worked briefly as a journalist and then got laid off and could not for the life of me find another journalism job. So I pivoted. I had been covering politics. So I then went into politics and became a press secretary on a number of high profile campaigns. They all lost. So
Very
I
high
had a
profile, though. Very high profile.
Yes. I worked on a governor's race. I worked on a presidential race. So I got some cool experiences. But then I ran a nonprofit for a couple of years, and that was actually surprisingly instructive to me because I didn't realize it at the time, but it is, of course, the exact same thing as running a small business. You're just reinvesting the profits essentially. And so I got the idea in my head at that point, oh, maybe I could do this for myself. And so that is how I became self employed now 19 years ago.
Wow. Well, I think you demonstrated, without me even needing to point it out, various levels of humility so far, Dorie, because there's, I could have told your story in a slightly different way. For a start, at what age did you get your degree?
So I graduated when I was 18. I started undergrad at 14.
Okay, well, firstly, I've never heard the answer to this, but how did that even happen? And also, as I understand it, unless I've got this incorrectly, are you or have you been on the board of that organization that you went to when you were 14? Isn't there some a school for the gifted? I don't know how to describe it. It
Yeah,
sounds amazing. It sounds like Professor X's Academy or something, right?
thank you, Alex. Well, there is a small college university in Virginia called Mary Baldwin. It has been around since I think around 1850. But one of the programs that they started now about 40 years ago is something that they and everybody who graduated from it sort of shudders a little bit because it's a bit of a presumptuous name,
Mm.
but it is called the Program for the Exceptionally Gifted, and so it is open to girls who are 12 to 16 roughly, who want to accelerate and do college early. And so I had found out about it. I grew up in North Carolina, which is a neighboring state, and there were a couple of girls from my community who had gone to the program, and I was not super happy in my school. Sure, I was reasonably intelligent, but also I was motivated because I didn't have a lot of friends at that point and just was not vibing with the people I was in school with. And I thought, oh my gosh, college, I am definitely going to have more interesting classes. I am definitely going to meet more interesting people. This sounds great. So I petitioned my parents, and they relented. And so I went off at 14 and was able to start as a freshman.
Did you find, do you think that was a formative experience, not just in terms of the things that you learned, but you you spoke about your motivation there, but that to me feels extraordinarily self-aware for someone of that age. Even to have that understanding of, I'm not happy in this situation, or I can see a better situation over there. And I think there's a lesson in there really, because as human beings in our lives, we often get stuck in a particular situation. So the fact that you kind of took that route so early, do you think that was formative in the kind of decisions you've taken since then? How did that play out?
I have a very soft spot in my heart for the experience that I had at Mary Baldwin. The university has changed a ton in the intervening years. There's a lot of things that are different, but I had a very special time and am loyal to the university because of it. To your point, I did for about 4 years serve on the board of the
Mm.
university, and I actually was just there about 2 months ago giving a talk. They had me down for nearly a week as a kind of quote unquote leader in residence.
Wow.
So I spoke at events and visited classes, and got to stay at the alumni house on campus, which was really cool to get to see it today. And the campus is still as beautiful as ever. But it was really great for me because it was the first time that there was ever a real intellectual community that I got to experience. I mean, I grew up in a small town, and it was not the most intellectual town in the world. I mean, I'm one of the kids that, like, I would have been happy as a clam if I had grown up in the middle of New York City. Like, that would have
Mm.
been a great environment for me. I understand it's not for, for plenty of people, but I like the stimulation. I like the culture. And I grew up in the opposite of that. And so I wanted to seek that out. And I was able to meet a set of peers that were deeply interesting to me and that I was able to relate to. And I taught them things and they taught me things. And so to a certain extent, I have been seeking out an environment like that ever since, because, that's really what is exciting for me, is just being around really cool, smart people who can teach you things. And to a certain extent, I've tried to create that for other people as well through the work that I do with the mastermind and the recognized expert community. It matters to me a lot to create a context where people can make friends and build relationships, because I think that that's hard in adulthood, because you don't, unlike a college campus, you're not thrown together and living together, so it's not quite so organic, but it's still just as meaningful at every stage of your life.
Yeah, completely. I think I was really struck from, I've been listening to a few different podcasts. There's lots of podcasts of Dorie out there that are really interesting to listen to. Dorie's got a number of different TED Talks, which are really interesting to listen to. There's basically lots of Dorie out there, which we'll get into and put in the show notes. There's loads to learn from Dorie. But one of the things that you said, which really struck with me, so much, but I thought maybe I'd misheard you, so you can help me with this, is that you said you're not a competitive person at all. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
thought that was fascinating, because to me, so from the outside at least, you've excelled in a number of fields, and with a lot of hard work, grit and determination, not having it handed to you, with a lot of work, but you've managed to make a success in a lot of the things that you've done, and hopefully created a professional life that you enjoy, which we'll definitely go on to. But I was really struck by that idea, because for somebody who got a degree at the age you did, and when you said that you were studying theology, I'm not sure that you mentioned that. I think it was at the Harvard Divinity School. Is that right? So we're
Correct. Yeah.
talking about, when you said that you've been doing some, politics, or one of them was for a presidential campaign. Like, you've done things at a very high level. How do you motivate yourself? Because I think, as a character trait for you, but also as an example for our listeners, not everybody is competitive. But just because someone isn't competitive doesn't mean that they don't want to be the best that they can be. So how does that play out for you in your life, do you?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I mean, I think it's a useful question because I think there is sometimes a cultural presumption that being competitive is the only way to be successful. That if you weren't competitive, if you weren't competing against other people or something like that, that there would be no drive to accomplish anything. And I just don't think that's true in general. And I certainly don't think it's true for me. Competition can be a factor. I mean, everybody, whatever, people who see Top Gun and they're like, "Oh yeah, you want to be the fastest pilot and like, screw you, Iceman," or whatever it is. It's like, okay, I mean that's one version of it, but I eh, I just feel like I have a reasonable level of internal self-confidence.
Hmm.
And so I feel good about myself. And so if I feel like I'm doing interesting things and I am trying hard, then that's good enough. That's good enough for me. And, I think that because I feel good about my level of talents or abilities, I think I will do well in that. But it's just I think it's a self-esteem issue in a lot of ways. Like, why beat yourself up if you're doing well and you're working hard? Like, I don't need to prove anything to anybody. And I if I'm happy with me, then whatever the results are, I mean, everybody knows intellectually that many things are a result of luck. It's like we know intellectually, okay, you control the process, you can't necessarily control the outcome. And yet people every day beat themselves up about the outcome. And it's just not really logical and it's often not kind to ourselves. So I try to break that cycle.
Just to stay here a bit, because I completely agree about the self-esteem and the idea that if you think you're doing okay by your own standards, your own values, which obviously you might have to take the time to consider and think about and challenge and experiment with and all the rest of it, then if you can be confident in that, then there can be a certain amount of you can be impervious in a certain way to what the rest of the world is throwing. For you, where do you think that comes from? Like, is it luck? Is it your genes? Is it the way you were brought up? Um, is it because you've put yourself through these formative experiences? Like, do you sort of apportion different bits of that self-esteem to different things, or do you not think of it in quite that way?
I wish I knew the answer in a more
Mm.
definitive way because there are a number of people in my life who have commented on
Yeah,
that it is unusual that I, just I'm a very self-esteemful person.
yeah.
you
But
know,
but
not
you but you seem from the outside, sorry to interrupt you, but you seem from the outside to not have a big ego, which is one of the things that I like about you. Like when you're having conversations with people, and as I say, we haven't met, so you might be a different person to how you come across, but I've consumed enough of your content that you have a relatability with people and a humility, which for me is it. You have self-esteem, but seemingly without the massive ego to go with it. I'm sure you have your
uh,
moments, but you know what I mean.
yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And also I think that these two things are actually very
Mm,
directly correlated
mm,
because the people with big egos I have found, I mean, I'm sure this is not 100% of the time, but I would venture to say at least 90% of the time, the people with purportedly big egos actually are just masking insecurity in a
yeah,
really profound way.
yeah.
It's those are not the people with self-esteem because if you need to brag about yourself constantly, that's a self-soothing mechanism. That's a reassurance mechanism that the voices in your head are wrong. No, no, I'm awesome. No, no, let me
Mm,
tell you how awesome I am so that you'll mirror it back to me and then I'll hear it and then it'll drown out the voices in my head. Like that's what's going on and it's sad. I mean, like I know a guy in the business world and he is legitimately incredibly accomplished. Like his bio, his stats, you look at it and it's like, "Oh wow." Like anybody would be impressed with that and it is almost tragic to me because he cannot stop telling you about it. And it's like, dude, you don't need to do that. Like it just makes me wonder like what is the gaping maw at the core of this, because it's just so unnecessary, and it ends up, I think, alienating people, or shooting himself in the foot, because, I'm clearly, I do a lot of personal branding work. I'm clearly not in the camp of like, oh yeah, just let your accomplishments speak for themselves. Like, I
Mm.
realize in a busy world, that's not the right answer either. But there is a golden mean, and there's a very wide field of play in between saying nothing about yourself ever and shoving your credentials and your connections down everybody's throat the minute you see them. And so I think that for people who have legitimate self-esteem and who just, feel okay, like I really would love more people. Like, I want to encourage people, like, i- if you're trying your best, it's really okay. Like, it's not harder than like the things they taught you at Little League, I don't know. Do you have Little League in
No, but I know that it's for baseball, isn't it?
Yeah,
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 yeah.
kind
We
of.
don't even really have baseball. We have so-called rounders, which we do at school. But
There we go. Well, it's like when you're 7, I mean, obviously some parents are maniacs, but in general, when you're 7 and you strike out and you get like mad at yourself, they're like, "Hey, it's okay. You tried your hardest,"
Mhm.
and like that's always the message of Little League. And like, it should still be the message. It should always be the message. Like, who actually cares? These are not high stakes, like world shattering things. We're doing our best. And I know that I do my best. So I feel really okay with myself. And I would like most other people to do that as well.
and and when we get into talking about your community, we'll definitely touch on this. But I think also the work you do with people, I presume, builds up their self-esteem in different ways and shows them that they can do it and they can achieve things and they can do those things while also being themselves. Because I think, the other flip side of or correlate with the self-esteem issue is almost, I also work a bit in personal branding, and people will think that they have to do things in a certain way to keep up. So somebody might say that they don't really like LinkedIn, but they have to do they have to use LinkedIn? And I'll say, well, it's worth thinking about. There might be a cost to not doing it, but it depends what you enjoy. Like if you like doing podcasts or video, maybe that's a better way to get what you're doing out there into the world. So it depends on the person. And I think that, a lot of the thing is giving people permission to look at it a bit more holistically and say, what resonates with me, rather than what are these other people doing that I need to keep up.
Yeah, so true. So true, Alex. There's broad swaths of best practices, but y- everything everything depends on the individual. It depends on the individual's goals. So it's not helpful sometimes to take an exact playbook and try to force yourself into it when it doesn't fit.
Definitely. And I wanted to make sure that there's another thing that I've noticed in the way that you show up in the world, which I think is really important, and that's your hard work and your tenacity. Um, and I've seen that exhibited in lots of ways. Just firstly, your content output is extraordinary. You're writing for different publications. Your LinkedIn newsletter, like you put a lot out there into the world. But I get the impression that a lot of it is viewed from the outside. It could easily be someone could easily think, well, you write for these publications, they have a big reach, so that must be easy. But the process of getting to write for those publications, which I know you now teach other people as well. There's a beautiful story you actually told on another podcast about, I think you wanted to write for the Harvard Business Review. It was a story about the bike.
Yes.
Would you mind telling that story? Because I think it's really quite instructive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this is now going back to about 2010. And at the time, the context was that I had not yet published a book. I really wanted to publish a book. This was a long-standing goal of mine. And I had written several proposals, and I had gone out to publishers and tried to get interest. And basically everybody said, you are not famous enough. No, you can't do it. You need to, quote unquote, grow your platform more. You need to become more famous. And that was very frustrating for me because, I'm impatient, right? I wanted to do a book. I wanted to do a book now. And I'm like, oh, like, yeah, okay, great. You're erecting this new hurdle that I have to surmount. But I knew that I had some kind of an advantage because I had been a print journalist. And so I was like, well, I could write, and I think, to be clear, you don't have to have been a print journalist. It was just that compared to the other options, I mean, especially at the time, this is um, pre lots of technology that we have now. It was hard and complicated and expensive to do podcasts and to do video and YouTube and stuff like that. So I thought, okay, well, writing is an easier way. So I started exploring that and had to work really hard. And something that a lot of it, you were mentioning humility earlier. If you do not have humility, humility will be forced on you because
You'll be beaten with humility until you're humble. Yeah.
you will. You will. So, I mean, I used to, like, in my head, I'm like, okay, well, people used to pay me money full time to write articles. Like, clearly, if I'm going to offer to write an article for free for publications, they're going to be like, yay. But no, they were not like, yay. They ignored me, and they were just deeply uninterested in anything I had to offer. And so I was constantly coming up with pitches, coming up with story ideas, and reaching out and just getting silence from all of these publications. And it was really demoralizing. And I had to just exploit almost every connection I had. Like, I was just going like a maniac to everybody I knew who wrote for publications and being like, hey, would you mind introducing me? Would that be okay? And it is a humbling process to have to do that a billion times. But yeah, I was just persisting and not having a lot of luck. What I did have was a lot of pitches in my back pocket because nobody was even listening to them or returning them. But in the midst of all of these fruitless attempts, I ended up selling my bicycle on Craigslist to a woman who, as it happened, worked for Harvard Business Review. And I did not know this about her, but she mentioned it to me. And so that was the moment where I thought, oh, wow, okay, here's an opportunity. So I then reached out and was like, hey, don't you guys have a blog that people can write for? And so I even then had to follow up multiple times with her. But eventually she was willing to introduce me to an editor. And thankfully, that editor was interested in what I had to offer. To be clear, not that interested. He published a few articles, and at first he was like, yeah, this is really good. Like, we might make you a regular contributor. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, that would be great. And then I submitted a few more articles, and he's like, yeah, maybe not. But I worked it out, and 15 years later, I'm still writing for them. But yeah, there were a lot of ups and downs.
I think for me, my favorite part of that story, and it was the same when I heard it before, was that once you met that particular lady who had that link, that you still had to do the chasing. Because I think it would be very easy to, when people tell the story of success or getting to where they want to get to, there's some like pivot points around which the world moves. So this is, there's a beautiful scene. It could be like in a film. You could make up exactly where you took the bike to, what a house was like, make it all evocative, what your bike, I know it was a nice bike, but what your bike was like. But actually, even though that happened, and that was a really good thing, you still had to chase and follow up. So it wasn't like that person was like, oh my gosh, Dorie, you're so brilliant. Okay, you're going to be our star writer. Can you start tomorrow? There was still a process that you had to still be persistent and work hard for that to bear fruit in the future.
Yeah, you're always looking for the place where it's like, oh, now it's going to be
That's
easy,
it.
and then like, yeah, not for a very long time.
Hi everybody, Robbie here. I'm the creator of The Coach's Journey. If you like what you're hearing on this episode, the chances are you'll love An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel. That's a free ebook available at thecoachesjourney.com. It's the most important piece of content I've ever created for coaches, boiling down everything I've learned from this show, from working with master coaches, and from my own experience into one simple model. The model not only tells you the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, but also shows you how they can form a virtuous circle that keeps your coaching business growing. It's all free, and you can find it at thecoachesjourney.com. And there's a link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
So I hope we're going to read a bit of a a bit of a sort of understanding of your tenacity and some of the things you've done and some of the areas for which you've moved. But I'd love to come a bit more to how your work's developed, and particularly how you support people right now. Because I know that you support people using some of the lessons, the hard-won lessons that you've learned over all this time, which we were just referring to. So what does your work look like now, and how do you support people?
So the ways that I do things, I mean, broadly speaking, in my own work, the main categories are that I write books, not every year, of course, but periodically I write them and release them. I then have a pretty good sideline in doing talks about them, so I'll keynote for companies, and then a little tiny bit of executive education teaching at business schools, and then the two larger focuses of my time are, as we mentioned earlier, running the Recognized Expert course in community, and then running a mastermind, which is a sort of more intimate and expansive and bespoke kind of thing for about give or take about a dozen people a year over the course of the year.
And so I'd like to talk a little bit about Recognized Expert, because I presume that the people who are coming to you to work with you and as part of that community are encountering some of the same things in a different form that you did when you were trying to get known as an expert. So a decent amount of rejection and things in the way and difficulties. They might have a goal, but it's difficult for them to get there. So what, without giving the game away of exactly what you teach them, for our listeners, what are some of the things that people are looking for you to help them with, and what are some of the sort of areas of development that you focus?
So you're exactly right, Alex. A big part of what I do now is, sort of jokingly, I'll say it's talking people off of a ledge when they're frustrated with their businesses. But broadly speaking, folks in the Recognized Expert community, they're very good at what they do. They're very educated, and it is really frustrating to so many people who culturally have been sold a bill of goods in some way, that if you get this credential, if you get this qualification, if you have this education, things will happen, business will come to you. And it turns out that business development and the sort of the new mandate these days of building a kind of personal brand or thought leadership around your work is a totally separate thing, and it is one for which we are not prepared largely. And so what I try to do in the community through the actual course materials that we've created, through monthly live sessions that we do, and then through our online community and events and meetups and things like that, is get people, number one, connected to each other so that they can build a friendship and build relationships with one another, because the best and the most fun way to learn is with friends and with people who are doing a similar thing. And then number two, just to normalize a lot of things. I mean, we have these periodic community, like every month we do community webinars, and periodically we'll do different topics where it's just always stuff that would be of interest to the community. But I remember that one we had maybe a year ago was we had a member of the community, Richard Bistrong, who had been trying for 2+ years, I think maybe it might have even been 3, to break into Harvard Business Review. And he had done multiple submissions. He had even done submissions with people, co-authored with people who had been published multiple times by HBR before. Like, he had done everything to try to get in and to do it right. And he kept getting rejected at every turn. And it was deeply frustrating for him because this was a goal of his. But finally he broke in, and finally they accepted a piece from him. And it was like, oh, okay. And now he has published multiple pieces, but he was sort of guiding people through his journey and talking about it and about the ups and downs and what he tried and what worked and what didn't work. And I think that's really important, because so many people they get turned down once for whatever it is, for writing the book, for being in a publication, for working with a certain client or whatever it is. They get turned down once and they say, okay, well, message received, universe. It's not for me. They don't want me. I'm not good enough, or whatever their script is. And I think that it is really important to level set that many of the people who are doing the thing that you want to do, whatever that is, were rejected many times before they cracked the code and figured it out. And you cannot take one rejection as being definitive. And so I think that that's often one of the most important messages of Recognized Expert. I mean, part of it is like tactics and tools and like, okay, here is how to do the thing that you want to do. But part of it is just seeing from other people like, oh, this is how it works. Okay, so I don't have to give up on myself or give up on this dream so quickly.
It's fascinating. I love the way that you describe that when somebody's going through that journey right now, it has a special power to it. So, for example, you might talk about this when it happened to you, and I know you'll still get rejected for things you want to do. But in the context of your writing, this was some time ago now. This is in the past for you. When you get a person on your course or that you know who is going through these things right now, that's such a good teachable moment for the other people. If they came out of the other side with a good story that they managed to succeed. But one thing that I was wondering and we want to make sure that I asked you is, one thing that I find difficult when you're kind of from a personal branding perspective, it's something I struggle with, and I think a lot of people might, is when people move from one area of expertise to another. Or it could be as simple as people move cities. You know, I know you've moved cities a number of times, having to reestablish yourself in a new environment. And I almost wish that we all had a kind of, I don't know, a calling card floating above our head that almost just said, I've done some stuff, I've achieved some stuff at whatever level, I'm a legitimate person, don't think I'm a weirdo, sort of thing. In your experience, if somebody is, for example, a lot of people listening to this podcast are quite new coaches. And so for some of them, they're starting in a brand new career, but it's so important for them to think about all the things that they bring with them, all the expertise or the understanding that will be really useful in the coaching space and really useful for their business, but they're not established in this world. So how do you get people to kind of bring enough of what they already had while accepting that they'll need to start at the beginning to a certain extent?
Yeah, you're touching on something very important, Alex, which is that, because Recognized Expert has about 1,000 people, I have seen a very broad swath, and it's really interesting for me to sort of see the stages that people go through as they're developing in their practice as a coach or a consultant, and what those stages look like. And for a ton of people, and I count myself in this category, right? In the earliest phases, you often feel really insecure about the fact that you are new at doing this thing. And, for many people, I mean, coaching is often a kind of, there's people who are starting out in their Gen Z or whatever, and they're starting as a coach, but it's much more frequent these days, at least, for people to do it as a career switch. So they're, mid-career or late career. And so they are not used to being beginners. That is a really uncomfortable thing because you have gotten good at whatever the thing is you used to do. And so it feels so weird and so awkward to kind of be a rookie and to not have the connections or the credentials or be able to, cite all the things that you've done. And so there is this tendency, and it reminds me of like a cat, like when a cat feels like they're under threat or something and they puff up their fur really big so that they look like 3 times their size, but they're really just like a puffball. And I think a lot of coaches do that too. And like, I think about when I first started my business, I'm like, oh, no one's going to take me seriously because I'm new. No one's going to take me seriously because I'm working by myself. And so I had this website, and it was like, a picture of like, the skyline. And, it was like the most corporate font. And it was like, I'm going to make myself look very legitimate here. And then a lot of places, even if it's a solo practitioner, they will get like a dozen of their buddies and be like, hey, can I put your picture on my website so that it like looks like a firm, even if it's not a firm? And it's just like, oh my God, you don't need to do that. Like, clients do not care. Like now people hire, I can say from experience, I know this, people hire me and they pay me a lot of money. They really don't care that I am not operating a 40-person firm or a 100-person firm or whatever it is. They want to work with me because they want to work with me, and they will want to work with you because they want to work with you. It's all about the messages and the level of self-confidence that we're telegraphing to other people. If you're weird about being a solo practitioner, then they're going to be weird about it because they'll pick up on it and they'll be like, "Oh, well, is that strange? Is that odd that, they're not with a firm? Like, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it, but maybe it is." So I think that we just need to own the background that we have and the skills that we have. And other people really don't care. They don't care about the corporate structure or whatever. Some people make such a big deal out of like, well, I'm an LLC now. And I understand in England, they don't really have that, but it's like, oh, I'm a corporate entity. And like, really no one gives a shit what your corporate entity is. Like, I guess your CPA does, but it is just about what you can do for people. And I think if we embrace the confidence around that, then other people will get that too.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. That's a really helpful answer, because you're right. I think a lot of people are switching into coaching. And so I think that sometimes people just don't feel able to, at first they don't feel able to bring all those things that they've already got and all those experiences that they already have. And the other thing is that, I was thinking earlier, when we're talking about issues of self-esteem and people's worth, if we're thinking about diversity as well, it's not as if the world is necessarily set up to tell everybody that they're of equal worth. So for some people, that journey is going to be bigger and more difficult. And so trying to help people see that they've got those resources within and that they have a worth in the world is so important. And I suppose as part of a community that you've built around these people, seeing other people do that must inspire people to do a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the famous saying, of course, in the coaching world, which you've probably heard by Jim Rohn, is you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And it's, by now it's a cliche, but I think it's a valuable one. You have to be in the room with the right people. And something that held me back, honestly, for a long time in my business, I think I could have advanced a lot faster, was if I knew more people who were doing the thing that I was doing, or who were doing the thing that I wanted to do. I just didn't know other coaches or consultants. And, the ones that I did, it was like they were not a good reference point. Like, they were people who were 25 years older than me, and they had been in business for 1 billion years. And so I just couldn't see myself in them. I didn't really know. And as a result, I was just making up a lot of stuff and I was guessing. And it's so empowering to be able, instead of guessing, to be able to say, oh, well, okay, I have these half dozen friends. Let me ask them. Let me see what they're doing. And I'll either borrow one of their things or I'll make an amalgam that feels right to me. And, good, then I'm informed. Because the problem that I always had as a coach, and I imagine it's true for other people, is that there's an asymmetry of information, right? Like, if you're consulting, for instance, if you're an executive coach, you're consulting for a company, that company probably hires 100 coaches a year, 1,000 coaches a year. They know exactly what market rates are. They know exactly how people structure things. You don't know unless you have a community of practitioners that you're part of. You're like, oh, I don't know. I mean, do you think they'd pay $500? I don't know. Meanwhile, they're paying the other guy $50,000. But there's no way for you to have that information unless you turn the tables a little bit and you plug yourself into a world. And sometimes people are like afraid, like, oh, but why would I share secrets with my competition or whatever? And I mean, oh my God, I hate that, because they are not your competition. The competition is either that the client is going to do it in-house or the client isn't going to do it. Like, no coach in the world is your competition. And the minute we start thinking of our colleagues as competitors, we have lost.
Completely. So how do you think you've been able to build those networks around you? What did you do? What did you start doing or do differently to develop that? Because, for example, I'm very lucky that in Sheffield, where I'm speaking to you from, we've got a coaching community, There's a coaching community associated with this podcast that I was part of for a long time. And just having people kind of say, oh, but I'm struggling with that too, or I've never understood that, or how do you approach things in this way? Like, is so helpful and useful. And really not everyone has that. I know that in the UK, as far as I can see, there aren't lots of communities like the one we have in Sheffield that are out there where we can share good practice and teach each other. How did you start to develop that for yourself? Was it over a long period of time, and how did that work?
Yeah, it was a slow burn in a lot of ways. I first became interested in online courses as a concept. I thought it was a cool thing. I wanted to explore it. And I first thought of Recognized Expert as just an online course. And it actually didn't really occur to me because this was now over 10 years ago. This was not it was not the thing to do at the time. But the members of Recognized Expert said to me, we want to be a community. We want to have a community. So can we have, at the time, this was like the cutting edge. Can we have a Facebook page? And I was, like a Facebook group. And I was like, okay, sure. And I was mostly just like listening to my audience, as it were. And so we put together this Facebook group, and oh my gosh, all of a sudden people are talking, they're building friendships. Like, I'm hearing these stories like, oh, well, Jeff and Chris met, and then, Jeff went on vacation, and here's Chris now, like watching his dogs and house sitting for him, and they're like, okay, they're like homies. We have people collaborating on articles, people doing projects together. It's like, oh wow. And so I just decided, I was like, okay, there's traction here. And so I want to lean into it. I want to help and I want to encourage it. So I started doing meetups when I would go to different cities and things like that. I would encourage people to have their own meetups. And that was great. We had an event in 2019 called RexCon, which was like a conference for Recognized Expert. We stopped doing that during the pandemic, of course, but we're restarting it again next year. So that's really cool. So I think I built up the audience necessary, which is sort of, you need numbers at least to be exposed to things initially. So I built up the audience through content creation originally, like writing articles and writing books. But then that audience, it turns into people who are raising their hands and self-selecting, and then they opt into the course. They said they wanted a community, and then we kind of, leaned into the community. So that's how it worked for me. And this is all over, like a 10 plus year period. But how about for you, Alex? How did you begin the process of sort of creating and supporting a community, or, both locally and around this show in particular?
Oh, thank you, Dorie. That's a good question. I think for me, that I've always considered myself not particularly a groups person. I'm quite a lone wolf in a way. And what I found is that luckily in the community of coaches, there's just people who it's much nicer to be in community with than other groups I found. So, for example, I used to work in the charity sector, and while I met many individually good people, I found it a much more cliquey world than I would have imagined. Coaches, I found, perhaps because coaches tend to do a certain amount of work on ourselves and see our strengths and our weaknesses, seem more collaborative, and in the main are much more willing to share advice, information, successes and failures along the way. And so with this community associated with the podcast, for example, it was because Robbie, who started the podcast and the community, he was a friend from previously when we were both working basically in the non-profit sector. And he started to share about his experiences on LinkedIn, which got quite a lot of traction. And then he built a community around it. And then I've made some wonderful friendships through that. And I think it happens organically, but it does sometimes need somebody to curate it a bit, just like you've done and Robbie's done, where somebody is like, there's these good people and they should really meet and spend time with these good people. And in my own career, one of the greatest joys is when I say to somebody, oh, you work in this space, you must know this other person. And they'll be like, no, never heard of them. Be like, but how is that possible? Because you're both brilliant. Introduce them, and then you're like, okay, you're a much better match professionally than I am to either of you.
That's really cool. I love that.
So I wanted to ask you something relating to this, which is that a lot of coaches, I think, struggle because they try to build a business which is only based around coaching, and especially when they're starting out, that's very difficult. So I know there's a lot of advice out there where people either shouldn't put all their eggs in one basket with coaching, or they could have a part-time job and do some coaching, or they could have a whole portfolio of different things. I mean, I haven't even mentioned yet, but Dorie's also written a musical. I think you've also done stand-up comedy. There's, be a real smorgasbord of things that you've been involved with. What do you think around that, in terms of when you're working with people and supporting people? Doing all those different things clearly works for you and has led to your success. But what do you think? Do you think some people are wired to focus on one thing more and just get very good at that if it's financially sustainable for them? Or do you think most people should have a mix? Do you have any feelings about that?
So I don't want to be overly prescriptive. I do think it depends on the individual. There are people that I know, a frequent co-author of mine, Alyssa Cohn, is one of them, where it's just like literally coaching is their favorite thing in the world. Like, just, that's all they want to do. And so if the demand is there, then, God bless, that's amazing. But I think that there are certain structural risks, and I'm always very keen to be aware of the structural risk. So the good news about most coaching practices is that if you are, operating where you're contracting with individuals at different places or whatever, whether it's self-pay or whether it's a company paying for it, there's usually enough diversification so that if you lose a client, a couple of clients, the business is not going under in the same way that if you worked at a corporation, if you had a job and you lose your job, well, that's like an all or nothing proposition, right? Like, you either are fully employed or you are zero employed. Coaching is usually almost inherently more diversified with the clients, so that's great. Although there are some coaches that have really the lion's share of their business coming from, for instance, a really large corporate contract. Maybe you're working with a company and you're coaching a bunch of people at that company. That is a structural risk that I'm not terribly comfortable with, because if they don't renew one year for reasons that may be well out of your control, then a big chunk of your revenue is imperiled. So I think when it comes to people doing what they want to do, I love that. I just don't ever want to put myself or hopefully see other people in a situation where chance can knock them out of the game. And so I think it's important to be diversified enough that if there is some kind of a calamity, that you are protected. I think it is much more rare, the idea that that there, it's extremely foreseeable that there might be a situation where a company doesn't renew a contract. That happens all the time. It is rarer that there might be a kind of apocalyptic financial event where coaching just gets totally cut, but it's not impossible, right? I mean, if there's a really bad recession or depression or something like that came, you can imagine, I mean, coaching is relatively discretionary in the scheme of things. It's definitely more in the vitamin category than the aspirin category.
Oh, I like that
And
analogy.
so, yeah. So I think that in the optimal world, you want to protect yourself a little bit so that there's at least other things, even if you're not doing them now, there's things that you could do, there's skills that you keep current in case like coaching goes away for a while. But broadly speaking, I think diversification within your client base is really the most important thing to do, just to keep yourself protected from the winds of fortune.
And you brought that so nicely into the next thing that I was going to ask you, when you were talking about the, some big financial thing going on. I really want to make sure I talk to you a bit about AI, because I know it's something that you've been thinking about, and specifically what it might mean for coaches and what you think coaches sort of should lean into in the age of AI. But also, recently I've been reading and watching more things that kind of suggest what could happen if AI really moved at a very accelerated pace. I'm not talking about doomsday scenarios. I'm just talking about changes in the world. And so I think that some of these things will seem to happen very gradually in certain industries, and then they could happen all at once. And so it's kind of double question. The first thing is, what do you think coaches can do in this new age that's coming? And then the second question, I suppose, is, again, without giving the game away, is there anything that you're doing to prepare yourself for those coming years, let's say?
So the first thing that I'll say is that this is a drum I have been beating for a while. It is, I think, worth continuing to beat, and perhaps even more so. So I want to say that there have always been structural challenges around competition in the marketplace. Over the last 30 years, it's, oh my gosh, there is going to be competition from overseas, right? We'll get Indians who can do it when they're cheaper or whatever. And then the wages rise in India. Oh, not that anymore. Oh, okay, it's going to be the somewhere else. And so you've had to fight back against commoditization for a long time. It is true that this is sort of a step change, because this is not, oh, well, they're 40% cheaper. This is, oh, you were making $200,000 and a $20 a month software can do it. That is a really big delta between those things. And so, that being said, though, I think that the antidote is the same. And that is anybody who is an average practitioner. And I don't necessarily even mean in terms of skills. You could be really skilled, but who is not publicly recognized as more than an average performer. If you were just seen as like, well, you're a coach, I think that there is going to be a lot of trouble in the marketplace, because if we go back to, the foundational literature around disruptive innovation, Clayton Christensen and the Innovator's Dilemma and things like that, the main point that they always raised is that in the beginning of any disruptive innovation, the competitor is never as good. And that is why they get laughed off, because the big guy is like, oh, I mean, who would want that crap?
Yeah.
But it turns out, and they don't take it seriously, but that crap steadily improves, and it probably never gets to the level of being as good. But maybe it's 90% as good, maybe it's 80% as good. And for the vast majority of the marketplace, that's enough. They don't necessarily care, right? Like, I am okay. Somebody might really insist on wearing couture clothes that are like hand stitched by trained Italians. I am not educated in that world. And if a machine is stitching it and it's like, 50 times cheaper, I think I'm going to do that. That'll work for me. And so similarly, for a lot of people, they don't know the difference. They don't understand the difference, or they just don't care. They're like, you know what? I need some help. It doesn't have to be perfect. I need some help. And you know what? AI is good enough right now that it will definitely give you some help. And it is, you can say it's not as good as the best coaches, but it's as good as, some coaches for sure. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper. So I think that probably the most important thing that we can all be doing, and this is what I'm doing, is doubling down on your branding, because the reason someone buys Prada bags is that they're Prada. That is why. And the reason someone will want to work with you instead of a $20 AI, which is, the commodity service, it's not necessarily because you're going to give, advice that's 100 times better than the AI. It is because they feel a level of existential peace and comfort working with you, because you have built a brand that is so trusted. And also the other thing to layer on top of that is that they might, depending on the brand you've cultivated, feel a form of status. Marshall Goldsmith, sort of made his career in a lot of ways because the executives he worked with were just as pleased to be seen with him as he was with them. And so I think that there's that too. But so doubling down, like, how do you get your intellectual property into the marketplace? Writing books, doing the things we're talking about, being on podcasts, hosting a podcast, writing articles for high profile publications, all of these things. it is a way of putting your stake in the ground so that people see you, recognize you. You're building a brand aura, which is the moat that helps make your business proposition of making a livable wage and hopefully even a good wage successful against the onslaught of $20 a month AIs.
Oh, there was so much gold in that, Dorie. That is brilliant. And it comes back, though, I think, to what we were talking about, but from a self-esteem perspective of, sort of leaning into yourself and being confident in yourself, because these things that we're talking about are really tapping into, if it's Prada, for example, what is it about Prada, and even what differentiates Prada from other luxury houses or luxury items. So, finding those, spending the time to working out what are the unique things that you've got or that people like you for. And then that's really about as well, not worrying too much about what other people are doing, because they're never going to be the best version of you. You're going to be the best version of you, even if they've got other skills. So I wanted to ask you related to this, and it's not something I've ever seen you answer somewhere, though you may have done. I've consumed a lot of your content, but there's so much I can't possibly have consumed all of your content, which is that, when you think about your work and your life, and this is really something, that I hope will be useful for the listener, for them to think about it, is, do you think of a particular legacy, or do you think of a particular point that you want to get to? And I ask that because, at a certain point, when you were going back to selling that bike to the lady, you would have, getting to that stage was where you wanted to get to. And now that was in your past, and you've been doing that a long time and had lots of other successes along the way. So are you peering forward into the future about where you want to get to and what you want to do? And do you even think of things in that way, or do you chunk it up into years? What do you tend to do?
Well, I think that legacy is a word that I feel like I'm sort of too young to address. Like it's that's like sort of a septuagenarian kind of question, I think. So I'm not there yet. That sounds kind of grandiose, but there are a lot of things that I am interested in that I would like to do that are challenges for me. I do think of time blocks. I for instance, have been on kind of a 10-year path with writing musicals. I started writing musicals 9 years ago, and my goal was to write a show and get it to Broadway within 10 years. that has not happened yet, and probably won't happen next year. But I have learned to write musicals in that time, and I have written 3 musicals, and every single one of those 3 this year actually had at least one developmental opportunity that moved it forward. I had one show that was featured in a new musicals festival in Texas. I had one show that had a reading in Malmo, Sweden, and has been now translated into Swedish. And I had one show that had a performance at the Club 54 Below in New York City this September. So, so that's very exciting. And the journey continues on that. I do, a sort of long-term goal that I came up with 10 plus years ago is that as I get older, maybe in the next, 10 years, 20 years, something like that, I would like to be a US ambassador to a foreign country. I think that would be nice. Obviously, we need to make sure that we do not descend into an autocratic regime before that happens. But assuming that, America is still functional, then that would be a thing that I would be excited to do. But we'll see. TBD. You got to be flexible with your plans, and and I want to write a thriller. So
Wow.
Yeah.
My goodness, I was laughing because I was wondering, if your window of opportunity for the ambassadorial thing was closing as we speak, whether, the development of events means that your time horizons for that was that you needed to get your skates on,
you gotta keep it loose.
Keep it loose. So, we're moving towards the end of our conversation. You've already given us so many interesting things to think about, a lot of takeaways. Is there any area that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I want to talk a little bit, Alex, about what what you've learned in the course of doing these interviews. I think it's so interesting. You've really gone in depth with so many people. What do you get out of this? And are there lessons that you have applied from things that you've learned or conversations you've had with your guests?
Wow. What a lovely question. And also that was like coaching in the moment, that it was a coach answered a question with another question. So I like that. Thank you for being generous and giving that to me. I think for me, there's kind of been a sort of coaching and business lesson, I'd say, and then a more personal lesson. So the coaching and business lesson would be that there's so many ways to make a living, and that a lot of people, or everybody really, is just making it up as they go. So there are techniques, there are ways, there are people you can learn from, there are better ways of doing things that will work for most people. But there's also just ways in which people try something and it sticks, and people say, oh, I like that. And you'll sometimes hear about people making money from things that you couldn't believe that they'd make money from, but make a living from it, and a good living, and enjoy their lives as well. So from the sort of coaching business perspective, that's the biggest one. And then the personal thing kind of relates to that, which is that after being invited along with a few others to be a co-host on the Coach's Journey podcast, one of the things that's been an absolute joy for me is just to invite people that I want to have conversations with and people I look up to. And there wouldn't have been a good opportunity for me to have had a conversation with you. You're a busy person. Our paths might have crossed at some point, but having the opportunity and the power of a podcast, and the collective and the community, and the fact we've spoken to lots of interesting people already, has really made that opportunity to just speak to people who are also on this journey, the journey of life and the journey as coaches. And it just strikes me again, as the other point about you just make things up as you go along. It's like sometimes if you do it in a respectful way and you're respectful of people's time, most people are pretty decent and also want to have a conversation with somebody who they can bounce ideas around with. And so that feeling of a partnership, even with people like yourself that I really look up to, has just been a real joy for me. And I think I want to apply that more to other areas of my work.
That's really cool. I love that. Thank you.
Not at all. So I want to ask you two questions to wrap up. The first one is there anything that you're working on right now that you want to tell us about? Like what's going on for Dorie Clark at the moment? And then linked to that, where are the best places for people to find you? I know there's many.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. We were having a little chat just before we went live because I am not yet at the place where I can publicly announce it. I always hate people being coy about this, but it just literally hasn't publicly announced because we haven't finalized the contracts yet. But we have an agreement with a publisher, some colleagues and myself, for a book about coaching. And so I'm really excited to be able to announce it very soon. But we are looking at publication in the fall of 2027, and hopefully you'll be hearing more about that soon. But it is squarely in the wheelhouse of the coaching world. So I'm excited about that and spending more time just really diving into helping people, self-actualize in that way. And to your latter question about the best ways for people to connect, I appreciate that as well. My website, which is kind of the storehouse of all things, including more than 700 links on there to free articles that I've written over the years for Harvard Business Review and Entrepreneur and Fast Company and things like that. You can get it all available on there. And you can subscribe to my newsletter, which is a weekly-ish newsletter, which Forbes has said will change the way you think. And you can get it at dorieclark.com/subscribe. That's where all my best stuff is.
And I'm going to ask you, because of the way that I think it's such a good lesson for people, the way in which you've structured your business is, suppose somebody's listening to this and they'd like to work with you. What are the ways in which people could pay to work with you? So, and we haven't spoken so much about it, though there's so much out there, but you're also employed as a speaker, so you can come and give speeches to people. But if somebody wanted to work with you, can people work with you one-to-one? What is the sort of the plethora of different ways in which people can work?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. Yeah, the main offerings, I suppose. I'm really not doing very much one-on-one coaching these days outside of the mastermind. But if folks are interested, of course, the great entry point is my books. So for £20 or whatever it is, people can check that out and can get a lot of information and articles for free by signing up for my newsletter. But if they want to work together more extensively, one of the things that I would really recommend, especially for coaches at all stages of the journey, is joining the Recognized Expert community, because it's not only a way that we can sort of learn together in community. I mean, I lead these live monthly sessions and with interesting conversations, and we've had this month's guest was a literary agent. The month before, we had a YouTube growth expert talking about techniques people can use. So it's things that are really relevant, I think, to most coaches that are looking to build their practice and build their platform. But it's a really wonderful community of people. So you can actually, if you're not lucky enough to live in Sheffield, it's a way that you can connect with a lot of fantastic folks and myself as well. I also offer a course, which is, an online course called Writing for High Profile Publications, for people who really want to go deep on learning how to do that. And then for folks who are at a sort of more advanced stage, they already sort of have a successful business model as a coach, but they want to take it to the next level. There is what I call the Trajectory Mastermind. You can learn about that on my website, but I work with about a dozen people in that every year. And that is the form of one-on-one coaching that I still do. And we form a cohort and have a really fun year together with in-person visits and coaching and virtual sessions too.
That's amazing, Dorie. Thank you for explaining that. And I really want to reiterate that I think this of all the guests on the show, but particularly for Dorie, the amount of her work that is out there, and the amount that's out there for free as well. Like, I highly recommend the books. I bought Dorie's books, but the amount of articles on LinkedIn that Dorie has, for example, the amount of expertise on the website. And also, I hope that you've got it via our conversation, but there's so much to learn from Dorie about the way that she shows up in the world. I think even if you're not a coach or not working in the exact field that Dorie is, the way which Dorie has shown up so consistently for a long period of time, despite not being very old, has showed up for all that time, and always, I think, just with that humility and just that sense of kindness. I always get such a lovely sense of kindness from you, which I think is really, really appreciated when, you're a person maybe starting up your own business and thinking, where do I start? What do I do? And who's out there to sort of help me a little bit?
That's so nice of you, Alex. Thank you. It means a lot too. I think that so often when I see people who are starting as coaches, the thing that people actually really need is encouragement in many ways. I mean, they're so talented and so good at the things that they do, and they are experienced enough. But when I wrote my first book, Reinventing You, something that I realized in the course of researching this about making a professional reinvention that was sort of surprising to me was understanding from talking to people who had been through kind of big reinventions, some of them to into coaching, that often, we implicitly expect our biggest supporters, of course, to be our close friends, to be our family. And often they are the biggest critics because they have especially your family, they have something at stake if you are making less money or if you change somehow in perceived status. And so they often take it upon themselves to be a little bit of a devil's advocate. Like, oh, clearly you've never thought this through, Alex, but what if it doesn't succeed? And, like all you've been thinking is like, what if it doesn't succeed? But they're like, no, you haven't considered that strongly enough.
It's a new angle.
It's like, oh. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, all these people need is just someone to be like, you know what, this is normal, this is okay, and like, yes, here's some techniques, here's some things that'll make it go faster, here's some things that'll make it go easier, but I think I think that we lose nothing by just being generous and encouraging to one another, and that's really the vibe that I try to create is for people to do more of that with each other. Because circling back here, we don't need to be competitive. We are not competing with each other.
Well, I must say, Dorie, that I'm pleased. If I take away one thing from this conversation, I'm pleased to know I'm not in competition with you, because you are a formidable competitor, Dorie, even if you're not actually competitive. So I think that's a great lesson for us to leave with. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Hope people check out all the amazing things you've been involved with, and I can't wait to see your musical on Broadway or in the West End one day. Thank you very much, Dorie.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Hi everybody, Robbie here, creator of The Coach's Journey, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. The first is my free ebook, An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel, which you can get at thecoachesjourney.com. It's my attempt to boil everything I've learned from my years supporting, coaching, and interviewing coaches about their businesses into one simple model containing the fundamentals of any sustainable coaching business. These are the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, and the things that if you don't do them, you can't have a sustainable coaching business. Get it for free at thecoachesjourney.com. And you can also find out more about working with me as your coach to support you to grow a sustainable and thriving coaching business. You can find out more about my group coaching programs for coaches at thecoachesjourney.com, or reach out to me directly via robbieswale.com to speak to me about one-to-one coaching to take your coaching business to a new level. Thanks so much to everyone who's supported The Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular, thank you to Alan Bedding, Jessica Jem, and Christina Matai for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.